So let's see, it's currently September 5th. I haven't really put out a video in a while. You know what? Fine. I guess there's really no more excuse. Let's go ahead and finally talk about this season of Big Brother. Hey guys, it's Kevin again, and yes, I am actually back. I know I have not done a proper YouTube video in quite a few months, just had a lot going on in my life, haven't really had time to focus on like YouTube stuff, but I figured that we are about halfway through the season of Big Brother 27, and I haven't done proper coverage of the season. I've been talking about it, if you pay attention to my Twitter or Blue Sky, I've been talking about it on there, but other than that, I haven't done like the weekly videos that I wanted to. I did start doing one for week 1. I just never end up finishing it. So I figured that, now that the season is basically halfway over, and currently we're in a time where there's no feeds going on. This actually happened at the most convenient time possible because we haven't had feeds for like almost a day, and I'll talk about that towards the end of the video of what I think is going on there. I guess I'll just go ahead and, give you my thoughts on this season. Now, I will say this is going to be a little bit more of a generalization than usual. I'm not going to go super in-depth with stuff because if I did, this video would be like 3 hours long, and I don't really want to do that. So I'm mainly just going to go through different aspects of the season, what I'm liking, what I'm not liking, and then kind of just, go a little bit more into my full thoughts for this season. So I guess I'll just go ahead and start off with what are my initial impressions? What would I really say about, how I'm feeling about this season? The honest answer, if I really had to think about it, when it comes down to this season, how do I feel? I honestly don't know, to be honest with you. This is one of the strangest seasons of Big Brother I think I've ever seen. This season does not really function like other Big Brother seasons have. There's not really a majority alliance. There's not really people who are... There are people who are, like, consistently working together, but, there's a lot of bad gameplay, and people aren't exactly punished for it immediately, but maybe there's, like, long-term consequences. You have a returning house guest, but yet it doesn't quite play out the way you're hoping, and just in general, it's a very hard season to predict. And normally, that can mean like, oh, it must be a really great season because things are just so wildly unpredictable and you never know what direction it's going in. Normally, that would be the case, but I think for me, what is frustrating me about the season is just how much we are kind of missing a central narrative. There really isn't like a main story. There is starting to be one. And I think that these past few weeks, the season has turned around and we've started to gain a bit more of a momentum to it. But for a while, it really did feel like the season was kind of just beginning. It felt like the first like 5 weeks especially of the season very much felt like we were still in that beginning phase, and again, it's a really tough season to talk about. It doesn't really function like, it's not really like anything I've seen before, and I'll get into why, but I guess we'll just go ahead and dive a bit deeper into it, because I mean, again, I wish I could give you a bit more of a clear-cut answer, but as of right now, it's really a season I'm just a little bit confounded by and don't really know how to really feel about, but I guess we'll just jump right into it. Alright, so I think the first thing I do want to talk about here is the initial twist and also, like, the theme of this season. Now, the theme of this season, I absolutely love. I love the idea of, like, Hotel Mystere and that this whole thing is supposed to be, like, a murder mystery type theme, and I also love that they really did go all out when it comes to the design of the house, the different rooms that we have here. The HOH room looks completely different. You got that train room that is pretty much like a hub for all kinds of drama. People always overhearing conversations by pretending to sleep. It's happened so often this season, and I feel like it's just been such a fun addition that I really do enjoy. But again, I also just really love the detail they've put into this season when it comes to the theme of the hotel. I think they did a really good job with that. I think the interiors and things like that, it's easily one of the best looking houses they've ever had, and I think many people have said that, but I will very much reiterate that I think that is very much the case. And this also goes for the comps this season are probably some of the most creative ones I've seen them done in a while, especially when it comes to like the costume design and just the aesthetics of it all. You really can tell they are putting effort into trying to make these comps feel a little bit more exciting. Those tend to be the least exciting parts of the show, is just watching all these house guests do competitions, and they are finding ways to, I think, make it feel a little bit more interesting, whether it's some of the costumes they give them, the different sort of ways they edit certain segments. I think specifically of the comp they did involving like poisoning the house guests. I absolutely love stuff like that. I love the way that they really put a lot of thought into that competition. It's very much just a social type comp, and that's something I will continue to praise the show with, is that they continue to do more equitable competitions. Even stuff that maybe had a bit more of a physical component to it, they find a way to make it so it's a lot easier of a comp that pretty much anybody can win, and that's something that I really did enjoy. I think a perfect example is the HOH that Rachel eventually ends up winning, which is, basically the one that Heisem won in Big Brother 25, where you have to try to identify, you have to try to evade the killer. Although the way they, sort of like revised it here is they've done away with the physical component entirely. It's no longer about trying to run away from the killer. It's about finding the room that the killer isn't going to be in, and I think that makes it a lot more interesting. There's a lot more strategy put into it. There's a lot more thought put into it, and that is something I will absolutely give the show, and something that they continue to kind of just knock out of the park. I think these past 2 seasons, they've really done a good job of finding different types of comps that pretty much anybody can win. There are some physical ones in there, but most of the ones they've done this season, even The Wall, felt like they found a way to make it so it was a little bit more in everyone's wheelhouse, and it wasn't something where only a specific type of person could win. So like normally you would have like someone like a Zach or a Zay, or someone like say even someone like a Lauren, or someone like a Morgan. Like these people who are really good at comps this season, you can have people like Ava win, you can have Rachel winning, you can have someone, you can have Ashley winning a competition. You can have a lot of unexpected things happening because you are finding different types of comps that everybody can win, and that's something that I think the show continues to do really well. It also makes the show a lot more interesting when pretty much anyone can win something versus, well, only these 3 people can. I think that's something that they've continued to do well within this season, and they've done well over the past 2 seasons. That continues to be the case here, and that is something I am definitely very much going to praise the show for. However, with that said, I do think the show is starting to become a little too overly reliant on competitions, and that really brings me to the BB blockbuster of it all, which, as you guys know, I was a huge fan of the AI Arena last season. I think it's one of the best twists the show has thought up in a while, mainly because of the unpredictability of those Thursday nights, really making the Thursday night evictions feel like must-see TV, and also just prolonging the decision throughout the entire week. It really does make a huge difference versus back what they used to do when you only had 2 nominations and you're pretty much set on what's going to happen by Sunday, and the rest of the week is just pretty much concocting what's going to happen the next week. If so and so wins HOH, who are we putting up, that kind of thing. Instead, now you really have house guests that have to think carefully about these decisions and what they really want to do, and I think it makes it a lot more exciting in that way. And so I will always be a huge fan of the blockbuster as a twist, and that still is the case this season. I think we've gotten some incredible evictions. I mean, the first eviction of this season was such a nail biter because you have Vince putting up Zay and you're not really sure if Zay is actually going to go. And if this was a normal week of Big Brother, Zay's probably not even on the block. You don't even have this whole decision of, well, do we evict Zay if it's Zay and, Kelley, or are we going to keep Kelley and how do we keep Amy here? You have that whole decision going on, and I think that made things a lot more interesting. And then you look at like the third week of the game where Lauren stupidly puts up Adrian. We'll talk about the gameplay a little bit later because that's a whole other different can of worms. But, Lauren puts up Adrian and there's the whole conversation of like, do we want to go for Adrian or do we want to go for, Kelley here, and what are we going to do in that scenario? And so again, so that's another one that I think about. Or even like the most recent eviction where, you have Keanu putting up Mickey, Morgan, and Vince, and then Morgan wins the veto, and Ashley ends up going on the block, and the whole week is pretty much riding on Mickey winning the veto so Vince can be the one to go, or is Vince going to win and Mickey's gonna go? And so again, there's a constant sense of tension. There's always something to think about come Thursday, and it just makes it just always makes those evictions so much juicier, and I think that is something that they did really well this season. That said, I do not think this was the cast for the blockbuster, because I don't think they've quite understood how to really make this twist work. I feel like quite often we are seeing players be kind of, petrified of the blockbuster. Oh my god, what if this person wins a blockbuster? And no, I'm not just talking specifically about Lauren, because yes, obviously, she's the main person you can call out, but the majority of the house guests this season, so much of their thought process has pretty much revolved around this person's going to win the blockbuster, so therefore I can't put them up. When I feel like the correct approach is what Ava does on her HOH, or what Rachel does on her HOH. Those are really the only two who do it correctly, where you just throw up three people. Even Keanu, I would say, on his HOH, I think did it correctly. Keanu doing things correctly is not something you're going to hear me say often. The way to really go about it after seeing 2 seasons is you just put up 3 people that are big threats, that are going to be big comp threats that you are okay with going. I think Ava recognized that she needed to do this. Rachel put up 3 people that she didn't really care who ended up going, and it seems like a no-brainer, but I feel like the blockbuster is kind of messing with a lot of the strategy, but I feel like the blockbuster itself, it's messing with everyone's heads in, what you really need to do in terms of getting out your target. And so what they end up doing is they put up their target initially, and then their target usually wins veto, and they have to make another nom that isn't ideal for them. Where I feel like, again, Rachel knew what to do, Ava knew what to do, and they had the 2 most successful HOHs of the season as a result of that. And I guess you could throw Keanu in there as well. He had a pretty successful HOH, all things considered, despite how incredibly messy it was. And I feel like that's what we have recognized with the blockbuster in 2 seasons, is that the way it really needs to work is by putting up 3 people that you know are going to be good at comps, and that way you're getting out a big target either way, and not putting up allies. But again, that is going to be in a whole other section of this video that we'll get into. So again, the blockbuster as a concept, I still really love. There are some incredible moments this season just solely based around the blockbuster. I mean, something like, for example, Mickey winning the blockbuster and sending Rylie out was an amazing moment. We'll talk about that side of the house in a little bit. I think that was just an incredible moment to witness. The moment where Keanu pulls out the blockbuster, and now it's going to be down to one of Zach or Vince, the 2 front runners of the game. One of them is going to leave. Or you have, for example, even this last blockbuster, with it being down to Vince and Mickey, and Vince winning the blockbuster there. There's just so many exciting moments we've gotten just from this season alone. And so I cannot say that the blockbuster twist as a whole, I'm not a fan of, because I still very much am, and if they wanted to be a permanent staple of the show, I'm perfectly fine with that. That said, I do think we need to do a little bit of tweaking here, because it does seem like this season they've kind of tried to do with the blockbuster what they did with the Battle of the Block in Big Brother 16, which is unnecessarily stretch it out. Because in my opinion, the blockbuster itself, last season, I think it ran exactly the amount of time that it needed to. I don't think it dragged on at all. I think from the Matt eviction to the Joseph eviction, it was just so exciting. There was this sense of momentum, and, it never really died down. This season, on the other hand, I do feel like there was a point where it probably should have stopped, and that was right when Rylie is evicted. I feel like that eviction was probably the time to stop the blockbuster from there. I feel like from that point forward, you don't really need it anymore. Having it at final 10, having it at a time where there is 10 people left in the house and you're putting up 3 people in a house of 10, I just think is a little bit ridiculous. You're never really going to get a HOH that isn't going to go disastrously as a result of that. And so I just feel like there is a point where it needs to stop. And, I thought that I would be coming on here to say that at least they knew to stop the blockbuster before jury. However, we have gotten recent news from Sharon Tharp that allegedly the blockbuster is going to be continuing for 2 more weeks, which if you're looking at that mathematically, that means that we could still see the blockbuster all the way until final 7, and that is just way too much. When it comes to this twist. There is absolutely a point where it should stop, and like I said, for me, I think it is final 12. I think that is the point where you need to stop the blockbuster. I don't think it needs to continue from there, and I hope that if they do continue to do this, they don't do it as often. They don't have it prolonging. Because here's the thing. I don't have a problem with, for example, Keanu and Kelley consistently winning blockbusters. Because in my opinion, that is less of a fault of the blockbuster twist and more the fault of the house guests not understanding how to make the twist go to their liking. I already said how it should go. The way Ava did it, the way Rachel did it, that's how you should. The way Keanu did it, that is the way to make sure that the blockbuster goes the way you want it to. You put up 3 people that could potentially win, that you don't care who's going to leave at that point because of the fact that no matter what's happening at that point, you're getting a target out. That is really what you want to do. But what I do have an issue with is us being in the final 9 and a house guest still relying on the blockbuster to get them through another week. And the problem for me with that is mainly the fact that nobody should be playing this game trying to win blockbusters. It is not impressive to consistently be put on the block just so you can then win the blockbuster and, constantly say that you saved yourself. Because, if you didn't win that, you could have potentially been evicted. So it should not be a positive. And the problem is when you stretch out the blockbuster as long as it is, it does become a positive. And suddenly you have people like Keanu and Kelley, who, by the way, are idiots, and we'll talk about that. But they are specifically relying on the blockbuster to get them further in the game and not really focusing on the more important aspects of the game, the social aspect, which is probably the most important aspect of them all. It just makes it feel not as important when you still have the blockbuster in there. So again, I like the twist. I'm never going to speak badly of it because I think even this season has given us some incredible moments. But I do think that there does come a time when you do need to wrap it up, and I think that absolutely, for me, Final 11 was the time to do it. Stretching it out even further than that is a whole different story, and I can't believe that they are even entertaining that idea. It really does feel like this is kind of like the reverse of the Battle of the Block, where they did it too long and then they shortened it, and it worked a lot better. And I'm hoping that the blockbuster doesn't end up having the same fate. I'm hoping this is a twist that we can still look back on and look at it in a positive light, but them continuing to stretch it out, I feel like we're just going to end up getting tired of it, and they're going to end up, scrapping it because of the fact that people are just sick of the blockbuster as a whole. Because again, I really do like the twist itself, but I think just the mishandling of it and constantly relying on it, that is sort of messing with the essence of Big Brother, and again, stretching it into the jury phase, I think is really just overkill at that point. So that's really how I feel about that. I do think that they're doing it for too long, but as a whole, it is a twist that I am mostly still a fan of. Something else I forgot to talk about is, despite the fact that I really like the Hotel Mystere as a theme, I don't really feel like the show has utilized it all that well. I think there was a lot you could honestly do with a murder mystery. You could have had somebody early on. In fact, when Rachel initially returned, I thought, okay, they're probably just going to kill her in like the second episode, and then the rest of the season's gonna be like trying to figure out like who murdered her and things like that, and there's someone in the game that's like, you know, a murderer, and it kind of becomes like, it kind of becomes like the mole or something like that, where like if you if you let the mole get to the end, the mole just wins automatically. But Big Brother, clearly they're not as creative like that. They don't really think that deeply into these things. So it kind of just feels more like a backdrop than anything, and that's very disappointing because, I mean, you have the Mastermind. They did a really good job with Ainsley last season. I thought they would do the same with the Mastermind here, but the Mastermind appears in like the first couple episodes. We find out early on that there's an accomplice in the house. You spend like 15 minutes of the second episode figuring out who it was. They get it wrong. It turns out to be Amy. And then Amy ends up going very early on and is probably the least impactful house guest of the entire game because she isn't really putting much effort in. She's not really pushing much of anything, despite the fact she's seen as like Rachel's number one. She doesn't even really see the benefit in like working with Rachel. And so she just kind of goes without any real, without any real sort of fanfare whatsoever. And so I just found it very disappointing. I feel like there was so much more they could have done with the Mastermind this season. You could have had like some sort of mystery going on that they had to solve, or you could have done something where, someone's like the detective of the house. Like there's so much that you could have done here, and I feel like they just completely wasted it as a theme. At least so far, they haven't done much of anything with it, and I think that's rather disappointing overall. So that's yet another thing where it's like, I really like the theme, but they didn't really do much of anything with it, and I do think that was very much a mistake. Now, let's get to the stuff that I think is probably the main reason why I am so conflicted on this season, and that really is the house guests themselves, which I will tell you right now, this is one of the most unhinged, one of the most insane, craziest groups of people I think they have ever cast on the show. I don't know where they found most of these people, and I really don't want to know, to be honest with you, because it's a really, like, ragtag group of people. I mean, and I don't mean that in a positive light. In some ways, I do. But here's the thing. Most seasons of this show, despite the fact that there usually are, like, two groups of people, I tend to be fairly neutral when it comes to that. I kind of like to just rely on like, okay, I like this person, I don't really care what group they're from. I think last season's a perfect example of that, where like, yes, I liked Leah a lot, but I like Leah just as much as I like Chelsea, I liked Quinn, I liked T. Core, like I liked all the different groups of people. I didn't really care what alliance they were in. I just wanted them as individuals to succeed because I liked them as people. I liked them as players. Unfortunately, this season, I can't really do that because there is one section of the house that I really like and another section of the house that I really can't fucking stand. And there really is just no in between. So I really can't be objective when it comes to this season. I am unfortunately biased when it comes to this cast just because of the fact that Rachel's side of the house, to me, is so much more interesting. The personalities are so much more fun and dynamic, and I just find them to be really entertaining to watch. Whereas the other side of the house, I'm talking about like the Vinces, the Keanus, the Kelleys, the Katherines, the fucking Rylies, that's a whole other different story. That side of the house is generally insufferable, and I really can't stand any of them. They have this constant victim mentality, always acting like they're above everybody else, always acting like they are deserving like special treatment and that they're playing better games than they are. They are constantly like just being very negative towards other players, but yet then they are upset when those other players don't want to hang out with them. It's just not very fun to watch, and pretty much every single time we cut to that side of the house, I find myself tuning out of feeds. I have been a very avid feed watcher this season, but I'm not gonna lie, most of the time if I have the feeds on, I'm watching Rachel, I'm watching Ashley, I'm watching Will, I'm watching Ava, I'm watching Morgan. Like, those are the people I am tuned into. This other side of the house, I don't really want to watch because I can't watch them for more than like 5 seconds without wanting to just immediately switch the feeds and maybe even, log out of Paramount Plus entirely and just turn on something else because I just can't stand them. And questioning my sanity of how did they even find these people on the show. And so it's a very strange group of people, the worst of which is by far Rylie, just one of the most toxic and despicable individuals I think we have ever seen on the show. The way he talked to Katherine, the way that he would constantly talk down to her, the way that he would basically going as far as to tell her to not talk game with other house guests because he wanted to spend time with her, getting upset that she didn't want to sleep in the same bed with him or kiss him and things like that. Just really uncomfortable to watch. And then her whole reaction to that, you can tell that she, I think, generally was just not in the right mindset to play Big Brother after suffering such a tremendous loss of her mother and things like that. You could tell that had a significant impact on her, and I think her getting into a relationship like that, she's not able to see that it is emotionally abusive in the way that it is, and that's what makes it so much worse, is the fact that she doesn't see it that way. And so, yeah, that was just easily the worst to watch. Him getting evicted is generally one of the most shocking things I have seen, because I was pretty convinced that he was about to be the new Jackson Mickey and that he was just going to get this great edit on the show. And the fact that the show decided to even edit him in somewhat of a heroic light is repulsive to me. I don't know who thought that was the direction that the show should go in, because when even the Facebook audience is hating Rylie, you have a problem. Like, there's just no way that that edit is going to be acceptable, and I don't know why they ever thought that was going to be a good idea. So the fact that he is gone is definitely a net positive. I'm very happy that he left the house when he did. I'm happy that Rachel made the move in getting him out. But unfortunately, we did have to suffer through that, and Katherine had to suffer through that for months on end, and that was just really uncomfortable to watch. On a lighter note, you also have people like Kelley, who I generally cannot stand, and probably one of the most annoying house guests we've ever encountered on this show. And her weird obsession with Tucker, basically trying to be the new Tucker, is just really annoying to watch. But again, the way she retells stories and constantly tries to make her instigations, even though she has said specifically that she is an instigator, trying to frame the person that she was instigating as the perpetrator, as the person who was bullying her in that way. It's just really annoying to watch, and I am not a fan of her at all. Vince is someone that I want to be a fan of. I really do want to like Vince. I think he could be a really good strategic player. The problem, he could actually be like a really killer player, and I've seen people compare him to Vanessa Russo because of how he acts. The problem is that I don't think a lot of it is actually strategy. I think some of it is, obviously, with the one-on-ones and things like that. I think he's very good at that kind of thing, but the problem is he constantly is worried about his reputation, how he's going to be perceived. He's waffling back and forth with how he should be playing the game, whining to everybody 24/7 about things, unnecessarily lying and things like that, and I just really can't stand it. So he's a player I really do want to like, but his mentality I just find to be massively unlikable and just very hard to really latch onto. So again, I think he has the makings of like a really good Big Brother player, but I'm just not a big fan of him. And then he also just kind of sucks. I mean, he's straight up like, doing weird shit with Morgan and saying that his girlfriend approves of it when she very clearly doesn't. And that's a whole other different can of worms, but that also does not, make me like him anymore. So yeah, not a big fan fan of Vince at all. Don't really like the way that he has played this game. Lauren's another one that, like, I really want to like, but her indecisiveness and her just taking fucking, like, 2 minutes to answer a like one sentence to answer like to have a one sentence answer to answer a one sentence question is just really insufferable, and I pretty much turn off the feeds every time she does. I mean, I will give her the award for like the best whisperer in Big Brother history, because I truly could not tell you what she is saying at any point that she whispers, but also I'm usually turning off the feeds when she's in the room because I just can't stand her at all. I'm not really a big Lauren fan. I want to like her. I like the fact that she's like, a big fan of the show, but unfortunately, that does not translate to likable personality, so not a fan of her. And then there's Keanu, who I am just so back and forth with. I want to like Keanu, but there are things that I just can't stand about Keanu. I do like the fact that he is a very active game player, but I don't like the fact that he's constantly talking down to specifically women and making them out to be these, horrible, like, villains, just constantly villainizing them and things like that and wanting to target them, and then always running back to other people and telling them things and never really seeing himself as the problem. And then when he does, he just continues to make the same mistakes over and over again. So again, another person that I just really can't stand at all. He does have his moments when I'm a fan of him, but most of the time I really do not like him. So he's another one that I just really am not a big fan of. So yeah, again, that other side of the house is just really hard to latch onto. And then even someone like a Zach, I didn't like at all. I found him extremely cocky and unlikable. Zay, I really did not like. I could not stand him. He has the loudest whisperer voice I've ever seen, but that's kind of the only thing I can really give to Zay. And then, someone like an Adrian, I couldn't stand the fact that he hated, liars and things like that. That was really frustrating to watch. So again, that other side of the house, just not a big fan of. I don't find them to be very likable, and I do think that does weigh down a significant chunk of the season, that there's a whole other side of the house that I just can't latch onto at all, and that's kind of what brings it down for me. And on the flip side, you have Rachel's side of the house, which I'm a really big fan of. Speaking of Rachel, someone who comes in the game, and I wasn't really sure how to necessarily feel about that. The idea of having a returning player come in the house with all new players, usually not something I'm a big fan of, but that's because it usually leads to something like a Big Brother 19, where you have Paul pretty much just telling everybody what to do. Nobody's really playing for themselves. It's pretty much just the cult of Paul all season. Or you have something along the lines of like a Big Brother 11, where like Jesse comes in and he's also like this really big threat and things like that. That's just normally what you end up seeing. Even Big Brother Over the Top, you had Jason in there, and Jason almost ended up winning the season. Because of the fact that he was a returning player. Usually they always have just a leg up in terms of, in terms of social connections. Everyone's going to gravitate towards them, but we've seen basically the opposite happen on this season, where Rachel's thrown into a house mainly with people who, A, have not seen her season, B, do not care that she is a returning player, and really only care about the fact that she's a winner, and they see that as the most dangerous thing ever. They see her come in the house as a winner and basically think that she's Dr. Will or she's Dan and she needs to go immediately. And look, Rachel is an absolute legend on this show. She is definitely someone that, when you think of Big Brother, you think of Rachel Rylie, but a mastermind, I would not necessarily call her that. That said, the fact that she's come into this season and had to play a game where people aren't really wanting to play with her, and she's kind of had to make her own connections, I think is really a testament to the type of player that Rachel Rylie really is. I think that it is undisputed that this is by far the best she has ever played on the show. The fact that she's made such strong connections and have people who actually are vouching for her. I think the best example of this is Vince's HOH, when he almost wants to put her on the block, but you have Morgan and Ashley and Will and, all her allies just trying to go to bat for her to make sure that she is not put on the block there. I think it's just, again, a real testament to the game that she is playing, and I think she absolutely, just solidifies herself as one of the true legends of Big Brother. When you think of Big Brother, you gotta throw Rachel Rylie in there, and this season makes a really good case for that. So it's just been really great to see her play this game, also play on her own without Brendan, without any previous connections, having to do it pretty much all by herself. The fact you have like Jimmy in there who from moment one wants to target her, and then the two of them basically become like best friends in the house. Again, it's just a really good example of seeing a Rachel that has recognized the mistakes she's made in other seasons. And yes, there are still tendencies that she has. She's never really going to be able to continue and win a fight. That's never something she's gonna be really good at. She likes being confrontational, but she's not very good at, winning arguments and things like that. She does sometimes have a tendency to, like, run to people and tell them information that she shouldn't, but you can tell that a lot of those more sort of negative qualities on Big Brother 12, and even Big Brother 13, she has kind of dialed back a bit. She knows that she needs to be a lot more social. She knows that she needs to slowly develop connections with people, and I think she's done a really good job, but she's also very persuasive at getting what she wants, and it seemed like for a while it wasn't going to work out for her, but she was able to get people to get Rylie out. She was able to convince people that Vince was this really big threat, and that's why Vince's game is kind of in the share, despite the fact that Vince kind of also did that to himself. But just in general, I've been very impressed by the game that Rachel is playing. Like I said, there definitely has been mistakes along the way, but I think, without a doubt, this is the best we have ever seen of her playing Big Brother, and I think that is pretty much undisputed here. So I'm just really a big fan of how she's played this game. I think she's done just a really great job in solidifying those connections, and also being somebody that is this really big threat, but yet is always evading the block, especially when you have something like the Blockbuster, and there's 3 nominees every week. The fact that she's made it all the way to Final 9 without being put on the block is just so impressive, and is such a test, and is a real testament to how she has played the game. She's never even, it's not like a Paul situation either in Big Brother 19, where like there were multiple times they could have been put on the block, but they weren't because they had that pen and protection. Rachel had none of that, except allies that went to bat for her because she made those connections with them. And it's just really been great to see a Rachel that is able to really thrive in this house in a way she's never really been able to. So I've been a really big fan of seeing her, and even again in a house where there are people that generally just do not like her. Kelley can't stand her, Mickey can't stand her, Vince is like hot and cold with her, Keanu wants to be like number one allies with her, but yet is always like running back and telling other people stuff and making her game so much harder for her. You have like Rylie and Katherine, who were very like on and off with her. Rylie again just couldn't stand like any of the women in the house, and that was kind of just like his entire game. Like just the fact that she's been able to play the game in the way that she has, I think is just really impressive, and I think again just a real testament to how much of a legend Rachel Rylie really is. And I think if you want to look at this season as like the Rachel Rylie show, you can and you can't, because it's not really like her dictating everything, but she is such a central figure of the season. You cannot in any way deny the impact that she has had, and I think that she's pretty much a shoo-in for AFP if she does not end up winning this season, which does not seem the most likely at this point, but obviously would be really great if she did. And even seeing a Rachel that, doesn't have to rely on competitions and can basically, play the game a lot more socially and develop genuine connections with people, and also, find a way to get people, to sort of like, soft launch the idea of targets early on in the game, pointing out how untrustworthy Vince is and all these different final twos he has with people, pointing out how, Rylie and Katherine are a showmance, and that's going to be a problem because those are 2 votes that everyone's going to want to, that are always going to vote together and things like that. It's just little things like that that I think are really just the hallmarks of a seasoned Big Brother player, and it's the perfect example of her just looking through the things that she has done right and refining them into a player that is such a genuine force, such a a genuine force and someone who, she's always been a huge force, but this time I think even more effective than she's really ever been, and I'm just really impressed by the way she has been playing this game. But enough about Rachel. I think I could, honestly gush for hours about just how impressive of a game Rachel has been playing this time around. Again, especially as someone who has played the game before, and her having to constantly rely on like HOHs and vetoes, it's really great to see her not have to do that this time around. And it's also just really cool to see. I mean, for me, the first season I ever watched of Big Brother was Big Brother 12. So Rachel Rylie playing the game in 2025 is a really big deal for me because it really does feel like this full circle moment. And it's just been really great to see her just fully, honing in on the things that she's done well, but also, again, figuring out different ways to play the game in a way she really hasn't before. She's still, again, just as confrontational, but it's a little bit more subdued this time around to where she's usually able to come back from what usually would be like game-ending mistakes, and I think that, she's just done a really good job. But again, enough about Rachel. I really could just keep gushing about her as much as I wanted to. Let's talk about some of the other players in the game. On her side, because again, that side is the side that I really do enjoy watching. Ashley is someone that immediately I was a huge fan of preseason, and she really hasn't missed a step, in my opinion. You never know what she's going to say, and that's what is so fun to watch about her. The self-awareness sometimes isn't really there, but I love the fact that Ashley just always says what's on her mind, but also has such good reads pretty much the entire time. You almost feel like she is, it almost feels like she's watching the feeds herself, and she's keeping, careful detail of everything that's happening, but she always is so on point when it comes to the dynamics of the house, and I feel like she really just needs like a few more weeks to become this really strong player. And I think over these past several weeks, she's really been like building up herself as like a really big social threat. You had Ava, who not a couple weeks ago saw her as like someone that she found to be a little bit too annoying, a little bit too social, a little bit too messy with people socially, and someone who just had very loose lips, and now she is actively campaigning for her to stay pretty much in all scenarios, and there's nothing you can really do to get her to change that, and I really think that is a testament to Ashley's social game, and so I'm a really big fan of her on the season. I think she has just been such a huge standout. Will's another one that I just really love a lot. I love the game that he is playing. I think the idea of him just kind of agreeing to people's conversations, but other people just not really despite the fact that he might not even be listening to what they're saying, and everyone just feeling so good with him as a result of that, I think is really good. I love like very chill and reserved nature that he has. He kind of feels like the normal guy in a house with a bunch of crazy people, and I think he's just a lot of fun to watch in that way, and I do think is someone that definitely watch out for in terms of the end game, because I think he's definitely a real threat to win in the towards the end of this game, because I really do think that he is someone that, I mean, he's on no one's radar at the moment. No one's really wanting to go after Will, and I think again it's because of the way he's been able to play the game. So I've been a really big fan of his. Ava is someone that I was a fan of immediately. I do think I have sort of simmered down in terms of how much I am enjoying her. I mean, in terms of personality-wise, she's everything I want in a Big Brother house guest. She is always giving you those quotable lines. She's always, finding herself in the most ridiculous situations. She's ranting about how much she can't stand people. But then she's also, saying a bunch of like out-of-pocket things. And I think in general is just a really likable person. Her gameplay is not the greatest, but we'll talk about that a little bit later. But Ava's someone I really do enjoy watching. And then there's Morgan, who I wasn't really the biggest fan of, but I really have turned around the past couple weeks. I liked her in the beginning of the game. I liked how active she was, but I didn't like her the midsection of the game when it felt like she was a little too invested on not playing the game and focusing too much on her very obvious crush on Zach, and that kind of weighing her down. Zach leaving, I think, really kind of boosted her game, and now I really do enjoy watching her. I like how active she is. I like how she's always thinking ahead of strategies. I do think sometimes she needs to kind of take a step back, but I will always love someone who, I will always prefer a player who is super active versus someone who has the potential to be and just isn't really doing that. Looking at Ava, for example, who likes to sleep a lot and not really engage in social conversations when she needs to be. So I think, Morgan is someone that I really do enjoy. And then you have Mickey, who I really did like for a while, but honestly really did end up losing me. I feel like Mickey is someone who had pretty much all the hallmarks of being this really great player. And then she makes, the dumbest move of the entire season, and she becomes almost an entirely different person, by putting up Jimmy, someone that was basically a shield for her side, which, again, I'll talk about this more in the gameplay section, and after that, she basically becomes a completely different person. She's very unlikable, she's very unnecessarily shady towards people, she's telling people straight to their faces that, she put them on the block, she's giving, saying, just, giving out very personal digs about multiple players in the game, and I just found myself not really liking her. I feel like, again, she's another one that has just this superiority complex, thinks that she's above everybody else, and I just really couldn't stand her by the end of her run. So I'm honestly glad that she's gone. I definitely was not rooting for her by any stretch of the imagination. The only time I really was to see somebody else leave. It was never really because I wanted Mickey to stay. It was because I wanted somebody else to leave. I wanted her to win the blockbuster so Rylie could go, and I wanted her to win this blockbuster so Vince could go. But Mickey going is not really that big of a deal. I really wasn't a big fan of her, and she kind of just ended up losing me entirely, which sucks because, like I said, I really liked that side of the house, but the more she went on, the more I just found myself finding her to be a very unlikable presence in the house that I just did not really enjoy watching, especially with how incredibly delusional she was, never being able to sense any sort of danger that she was in. Just not really a big fan of her at all, but overall, that side of the house, I really do enjoy watching for the most part. The fun side of the house, as I like to call them, I think it's just really great to watch. They all have really great personalities, and if that was this entire cast, this would be a generally top tier season, but like I said, that is not the case. But at least that one side of the house really does deliver, and when they are in power, when they are the ones making the moves, when they are getting their way, that is when the season is fun to watch for me. That is when I am enjoying what is going on, but sometimes that is not always the case. Alright, but now let's get to, I think, really the one thing that is actively hurting this season for me, and the thing that's really making that the reason why I am so back and forth with this season, and that is the gameplay of the season, which I will just say is mostly atrocious. I mean, this is some of the worst strategy I think I have ever seen, and here's the thing. Last season, I thought gave us some pretty terrible HOHs, but when you compare it to this season, whether it comes down to the HOHs, whether it comes down to the way they navigate, certain relationships, the way some of these players just maneuver in general, it's just all around really bad, and honestly very hard to talk about with just how terrible so much of it is. And here's the thing. You have Big Brother 26, and you go through the HOHs, specifically Quinn's, and I look at MJ's last season, and they seem pretty terrible, but when you look at the ones this season, their HOHs seem like, some of the best HOHs we've ever seen, compared to the ones we get here, because there's almost no good HOHs this season. Aside from, like I said, Ava, Rachel, and Keanu, pretty much everyone else is terrible. I mean, Vince's first HOH he practically doesn't want. He's basically just listening to what other people are telling him. He's putting up people that want to work with him, and then he's putting up his number one ally as a renom, knowing that she could very well end up going out of the game, despite the fact he's made a final two with her. He is putting her up as a reason to, he is putting her up as a renom, so she will then win the blockbuster because he feels like it's the path of least resistance. And this continues to be the same throughout basically the entire course of this season. Jimmy does the same thing, puts up an ally for really no reason. Lauren is the most indecisive HOH I think we've ever seen. She wants people to dictate to her what to do. Nobody's really doing it. Vince and Zach have an opportunity to do so, but they're also kind of pushing back and things like that. And so the issue that I have with it is that, so many players are making such actively bad decisions. And I think there is one huge reason for this. And I think, unfortunately, a big reason for this is really because of Tucker last season. I think a lot of people watched Big Brother 26 and took absolutely the wrong lesson from it, because you should be watching Big Brother 26 and studying Chelsea's game. Absolutely. Chelsea is the one who wins. Chelsea is the one who navigates the blockbuster the best. She is the one who is able to pull off the majority of the massive moves last season. She's just so ahead of the curve of pretty much everyone else. So she should be the blueprint for what they should be studying, but that's not what they're doing. Instead, they've gravitated towards Tucker because, well, yes, he's a really fun personality. He's a abysmal game player. I mean, there was barely anything Tucker did last season that was beneficial for his game. He was doing things quite literally because he was bored, because he felt like there wasn't enough happening in the house. And to see so many players this season adopt that same mentality is just really insane to watch, especially someone like Kelley, who is using the fact that she is being put up for the blockbuster, volunteering for the blockbuster as a badge of honor, gets mad at Rachel even on her HOH that she does not renom her because she misses being in the blockbuster. It's just absolutely insane. I've never seen anything like it. I've never seen a scenario where someone is happy to be nominated, but that's absolutely the case with Kelley and pretty much every HOH following Vince, who puts up Kelley very early on his HOH, pretty much as a who puts up Kelley on his HOH basically because, she volunteers, despite the fact that they're supposed to be like number one allies. Everyone else pretty much follows suit, where they put up close allies that are, should have no business being nominated on their HOH, yet there's a whole other side of the house that they just kind of ignore. Jimmy has an opportunity to put up Katherine or Lauren, but he feels like Katherine and Lauren are good with him, so he doesn't put them up, despite the fact that he was considered as a renom the following week. He's not a renom, but he is very heavily considered as one. And then we get to Mickey, who has maybe the worst HOH I think I've ever seen, where she's literally has a power, takes away Riley's HOH. He is dethroned as HOH. There is zero reason why you should not be wanting to go for Rylie at that point when you know that you were a possible consideration, and that's the reason you used that power, because you knew that you were a consideration. And instead, she decides to go after Jimmy, who is literally a shield for her side, and basically destroys her entire game. Mickey loses all social capital through this move. Nobody takes her seriously after this because she just put up an ally. The problem is, Mickey's not the only one that's making this mistake. We see Vince makes this same mistake on his second HOH, where, yes, he's pulled into this alliance with the judges, which is, really the only form of consistency that we'll talk about, but he puts up an ally in Katherine. It's happening constantly this season. People are just throwing up their allies for no rhyme or reason, and it's not really till Ava becomes HOH that people actually realize, oh, wait, that's what I'm supposed to do. I'm not just supposed to put up my allies, I'm actually supposed to put up people that I want to target. Again, it seems like a no-brainer, but they're just not able to recognize that, and it's just the gameplay in this house, it almost feels like a different show. I don't feel like I'm watching Big Brother most of the time, because the way that everyone is playing the game, it feels like they're so convinced that the way they're playing is the way the game is meant to be played, and that they're doing it the best way that they can. And I think that's the part that's frustrating to me, is that everyone is so sure that they're playing optimally and that they're doing exactly what they need to do, and yet they're told repeatedly that they're not playing the game correctly, and that they need to fix these things, and they keep doing it constantly. There are definitely instances of good gameplay this season. I don't want to pretend there aren't. Like I said, I think Will's strategy of basically just agreeing with everybody to the point where everybody trusts him, I think is really paying off in dividends for him. I do wish he was a bit more active, but he is starting to become more active. He's basically the reason that the Judges Alliance really came together, because he had that conversation with Ashley, and because he's now built this relationship with her, the two of them talk about potentially forming an alliance with Rachel and Morgan, who they really like, but they also know that they have to pull in Vince, and so they now have the Judges, which seems to maybe be a thing if Vince wasn't so adverse to, actually having some sort of consistency in his game, because that really is the other, if Vince was, not so adverse to having some kind of consistency in his game, so we do have that. Like I said, I think the way Rachel pushed for Vince early on as this really big threat, I think was really good. Ashley having this strategy of like kind of dumbing herself down, and then she's going to pivot in the jury phase is something that I think is really paying off for her. I think people are starting to take her a bit more seriously and see her as an actual player, and I think it's starting to work out pretty well for her. So I like the way that she's been playing the game so far. I think Ava early on in the game getting Zach and Vince to essentially change their votes from Will to Adrian when it made zero sense for them to do so, I think was an incredible move from her, and that's part of the reason I've been disappointed with Ava, because I don't really feel like she's employed that same sort of, sort of manipulation into the rest of the game. Instead, she's told people that she was manipulated to do other things, and I think it's kind of weakened her as a player. So again, the gameplay is just really not that great, but there are still sparks of it here and there. It's just not the way it's been in other seasons. For the most part, this is a abysmal cast strategically. And there really is no other way to look at it. And I think really the most disappointing factor with it is that normally you have a player that uses this as a way to basically, boost their game in a way that they weren't able to do with a cast that is more strategically sound. You have that one person that pretty much takes the reins of the game, and there's multiple opportunities for players to do that. Zach and Vince, I think, is the perfect example of this, where, like, if they pushed anything, they could really get stuff done. If they had pushed for Adrian to stay, Adrian would have stayed and Will would have gone. Now, would I have liked that? Absolutely not, but that's something they absolutely could have done. But that's something that they, for sure could have done. I would not have liked it in any way, but that is something that they absolutely could have done. I look at, for example, Ava on her HOH, where, she spends the majority of the HOH just kind of lying in bed and not really doing much of anything, because I think she won HOH and didn't realize that she didn't really want to have to target people, but if she had pushed for the fact that she wanted one of Zach or Vince to go, I think she could have maybe made it happen, and maybe the other person ends up going instead of Zach because people generally wanted her input, but she didn't really give it to them, and I think that's another example of that. Or Vince on both of his HOHs, like there's just, or Lauren on her HOH, if she had pushed for something and not just, and not just been such a coward to where she doesn't want to make a move because she's so deathly afraid of pissing off people. Again, there's so many opportunities for people to make moves this season, and they're just not taking advantage of them. And I think that is what is so frustrating when it comes to the gameplay this season. It's not just the terrible things that have happened, the objective things that happen, like Mickey putting up Jimmy, or Zach winning a power that gives him the ability to literally take himself off the block at any opportunity. The first time he's put on the block as a Renom, he uses the veto and he's taken off the block, and instead he decides to keep the veto because he just doesn't want to give the 10k to Ava because she put him on the block and now he's pissed at her for it, and also doesn't want to risk Morgan going on the block because, I don't know, he's worried that she's gonna go in that scenario. So instead he decides to keep himself there and ends up getting evicted. Things like that are just absolutely insane. The fact that things like that are just crazy to me. The fact that he didn't do that is just, it's mind-blowing. It's generally a baffling thing that can happen. But on this season, a bad move just feels like just like a regular Tuesday, pretty much. Like it's pretty much just like the standards for this season. There really is not a lot of good gameplay. You really have to look hard for it, and I think that's the other part that's been so frustrating about this season, is just how abysmal so much of the gameplay has been. And those are just a few examples of what has been, for the most part, a absolute travesty of a season strategically. And the problem for me really this season, I think, is that normally there is like that one house guest that's like above everybody else, and they're the one that's playing the game the best. You look at like Chelsea last season, you did have some really bad gameplay in Big Brother 26, but she was pretty much the figurehead of everything, and you really just enjoyed watching her, maneuver. You really just enjoyed watching her play the game in the way that she did. Her strategic maneuverability, her social, superb social game, the way she was able to get everybody to do what she wants pretty much and have such a hold on that house. You always are hoping for that. And this season, we don't really have that. There's not really that one person who's playing the game better than everyone else. I mean, you can say Rachel because Rachel is much more experienced, and I think that's very much the case, but even Rachel is making some key mistakes by constantly trusting Keanu despite the fact that everyone's telling her that she shouldn't do that. Or not fully utilizing some of her final two. She makes the final two with Ava very early on in the game, and there really isn't a ton of progression with that. It didn't really feel like that was, a bond that she really tried to push until she absolutely needs to, and I do think that is a mistake on her end. But again, this is nothing compared to other mistakes that people have made, but she's not completely absolved of it either. So, again, just in general, like, most of these house guests just can't possibly get their shit together in terms of gameplay, and, it pretty much erodes throughout the entire house. Even when even the best player of them all, in Rachel, still, that bad gameplay is eroding through the house, and it just makes for such a sloppy season in terms of gameplay overall. So something else I forgot to leave out in regards to Vince is that I've seen a lot of people throughout the season compare him to Vanessa Russo, and let me explain why I think those comparisons are really unwarranted, because here's the thing. Was Vanessa Russo a very emotional player? Absolutely. Was she someone who a lot of the time would like break down and, talk about how much she hated, doing stuff and things like that, and how she wanted to, and even started off the Big Brother 17 live feeds talking about how she wanted to leave the game because it was just too stressful to her? Yes, but to her core, she was a strategist. She was able to push things. She was able to use her emotion as a manipulation tactic to get people to do what she wanted, and she was very successful in doing so. Look at the Austin week, for example. One of the greatest weeks in Big Brother history, the way she was able to pull all of that off. I think that is just a key example of what she does well. And then you look at Vince, who, by all means, should be able to have that same ability. He has control of some people. Early on in the game, you have Kelley, who he makes the final two with, and despite the fact that she volunteers for the block, he could have easily not put her on the block and said, no, that's stupid, let me actually try to work with Kelley and put up somebody else. If he was worried about, the Ashley and Amy dynamic early on, what you do at that point is you throw on, one of Ashley or Amy's allies. There's multiple points in this game also where he wants to clearly take a shot at Rachel and thinks that she is a problem, but instead of just, taking the shot and just putting her up, he decides to back off and, instead decides to put up another ally. Every opportunity he has to do something, or probably the most, I think, blatant example of Vince needing to push something and not doing it, well, actually, I can give you two. Early on in the game, there is this guy, there's Adrian, who, is very much someone that Lauren is considering putting on the block, but she was also considering Ashley, and if he had any power whatsoever, he would be willing to push her to put Ashley on the block, and Ashley would go on the block. And then, later on in the game, there is a point with Keanu where, he very well could, where Vince has the information of this, knows that Rachel and Ashley have been throwing Ava under the bus. And after Ashley is nominated, this is his opportunity to go to Ava and convince her why Ashley should go in all circumstances, because he does not really want Ashley in the game. Instead, he just doesn't do it. And This all boils down to really one big reason that very much separates Vince from Vanessa, and that is just how much of a coward he really is in this game. This guy will do absolutely anything to try to, absolve himself of any credit whatsoever. He will do whatever he can to constantly push back against things that he has done. And some people thought that that was maybe strategy, and I was on board with that for a little bit. Maybe that's his strategy, but I really don't think it is. I really just don't think it is. Because there are so many moments throughout this season where he is just, talking to somebody and just ranting to them as if he's doing a confessional, as if he's talking in the diary room about perception and how worried he is of how he's going to look. Oh, I'm going to look like a huge weasel if I don't make this, if I don't make this move. Oh, but if I make this move, I'm going to look so bad. Nobody's going to trust me again. All this stuff. And it's just so insufferable to watch, and I really think that, if he would just be willing to take a shot and stick to it, he could honestly be a really good player. But because of the fact that he is so petrified of how people are going to perceive him after the game, even though he's not petrified of how, maybe important people in his life, Kelsey, are going to view him at the end of this game, but that's a whole other different discussion. He's just allergic to making any kind of move and pushing anything whatsoever, and it's just so frustrating to watch. So again, I really do think he could be a really good player, but he's just so insistent on not doing so. He's just so insistent on making sure that he doesn't have to have any say in what's going on, that he doesn't have to play any role in anything, and so as a result, other people are just having the upper hand. Instead of him pushing for Ashley to go on the block, Rachel's side is the one that's pushing for Adrian to go on the block, and Ashley gets such a good pitch to Lauren that Lauren is convinced and puts Adrian on the block. Instead of him deciding to target Rachel, he instead lets Morgan basically run his entire HOH as well as Ashley and the Judges Alliance, and instead puts Katherine on the block. Someone who, yes, said that she was coming after him, but that's only because he has not voted with her. He has not made it clear that he is on her side. And so now he's in a situation where I generally don't know if he can win. The people that have been backing him all this time are even starting to get frustrated with him, and I really do think that is pretty much all his doing. So, yeah, just a really frustrating player to talk about. Again, I think he has the attributes of somebody who could, for 100% sure, be the front runner of this game. By all intents and purposes, he should be the front runner of this game. But it's because of the fact that he is, but because of his own insecurities and his own paranoia and his own just sort of, his own constant just whining and complaining, he just isn't really able to get anything done, and he continues to just be in the same position that he's in week after week because of the fact that he isn't willing to be that active of a player, and I think that generally is what's put him here. So I think Vince is really just the prime example of what's wrong with this group of players. Someone who absolutely could be really effective if he just do anything, but so many of them are just afraid of doing anything that they continue to just find themselves in the same position and don't seem to learn from their obvious mistakes, and I think Vince is just a perfect example of that. Alright, so it's very clearly a different day, as you can tell, and by this point, I do know what has happened in the game regarding the twist and things like that, and we'll get into that in a separate video, but let's just pretend that hasn't happened yet. Let's just pretend that we're living in a world where, we don't know what happened when the feeds came back on Saturday and things like that, and let's talk, because there's really no other way for me to talk about this next part of the video without me pretending that that part of the game hasn't happened yet. So we're just going to go back and we're going to talk about one of my biggest things with this season that really makes me, that has really made it hard for me to fully distinguish how I feel, to fully discern how I feel, and that is the story of this season. And I'll say right now, there really hasn't been much of one, and I think that's And that's really the main thing, is that there really hasn't been much of one. And that's really the main thing that brings it down, is that normally when you get this like really messy gameplay, that makes for so much chaos, so much, excitement. There's so much intrigue surrounding it. And that is sort of the case this season, except it just feels like it is a prolonged, first act. If I had to compare it to, a movie, for example, it almost feels like when you have, a part one, part two of a film, they split the film into two different parts. And this is all pretty much part one, because of the fact that we have so many players that are so incredibly passive and not willing to push much of anything. There's just so much buildup for this season. When it comes to Vince and Rachel, for example, they probably should be the rivalry of the season. And if Rachel wasn't in the house, this probably wouldn't even exist if that was the case. The Vince and Rachel of it all is just so intriguing, because she recognizes early on, they make the heavy hitters as an alliance, and Rachel realizes pretty quickly that oh, he's a really big threat. He's very close to Lauren. He's got all these other, deals with people. He's so good at talking with others. He's a really big threat in that way, and that gets others to start looking at him, like Ava, who calls him Vinny the Lip throughout the rest of the season pretty much. You have Mickey on her HOH, probably should put him up and doesn't for some reason, instead puts up an ally, which, I already talked about how fucking stupid that is. But that's what she decides to do. And again, but there's not really a conclusion to that storyline. It hasn't really gone much of anywhere aside, at least for a while. It seemed like that was just something that was kind of on the periphery. Rachel and Keanu is another one where it's this is such a weird dynamic. I don't think I've ever seen a dynamic, and it's a dynamic that I don't think I've really ever seen before on a Big Brother season, where these are two people who absolutely should work together, and Rachel knows that they should work together, but Keanu, for some reason, has this tendency to just disregard pretty much everything she says, probably because she's a woman, because for some reason, all the women in the house are wrong, and all the men in the house are correct. But nobody's more correct than him, of course. He has the right perception, and nobody can tell him otherwise. But yet, he still feels drawn to Rachel. He still wants to work with her, but he, for some reason, decides to regurgitate everything she's saying to Vince. And this would be really good strategy if Vince was actually caring about Keanu to the capacity that Keanu thinks he is, but he kind of wasn't. But again, that's a really interesting storyline. And you think maybe that's going to go somewhere. And, it's starting to go somewhere in the sense where it's kind of like this back and forth, where sometimes these two are not at all, trusting each other, but then they come back to each other, and then Rachel comes back to him, and then he comes back to her, and then now he wants to get her put on the block because he saw in her HOH that she actually is a very powerful player and that he probably can't beat her at the end. So now he wants her out immediately, despite the fact that he could easily just kind of continue to work on this thing with her until he absolutely has to target her later on in the game and take that shot. Instead, he wants others to do it for him. And so, but he decides that this needs to happen immediately, and this obviously gets Rachel upset, but she doesn't fully believe it, and then eventually she does end up believing it when he puts up Ashley. So it's just this really weird back and forth, but it's been one of the most interesting storylines of the entire season. I don't particularly like Keanu all that much, but whenever I do, it's always based around this story. It's always based around seeing these two interact. When he starts to actually value her input, that's when I feel like Keanu actually starts to become a better player. It's just very often he doesn't. And so, I think that's an interesting story. And then, of course, you have now this potential alliance of the judges, because the thing is, this has not been a very alliance heavy season. So many of these people are making such such game-ending mistakes, such disastrous moves that alliances just don't go much of anywhere. You had the heavy hitters early on, which seemed like maybe that would be a thing, but they add Rylie to the alliance and then realize they don't really want him there, so then they put Mickey in there instead, and Mickey now has like a prime opportunity to try to work with like Jimmy and Morgan. They lock down this trio of sorts. You think maybe that's going to be a thing, but then, Mickey wins HOH and puts Jimmy up, and that kind of kills the heavy hitters, because all that's left at that point is like Zach and Vince and Rachel and Mickey and Morgan, and the problem is that Rachel doesn't really trust Vince anymore, and she's never really trusted Zach, so that doesn't really end up being much of a thing. You have early on, there's the Bond, which is an alliance of sorts that like Ava and Will and Rylie and I believe Lauren, I don't even remember who else was in there. I think Zach and Lauren maybe were in there as well. I know Lauren was in there and Will was in there, and I believe it was Rylie and Zach as well. But that ends up not really going much of anywhere because Lauren for some reason decides, Adrian's in there as well. Lauren decides to put up her allies in that alliance on her HOH, so that really doesn't end up going much of anywhere. There's some other alliances like the Melting Pot, maybe that's gonna be a thing, but then Zach makes the terrible mistake of not playing his power, and that kind of all implodes. So again, there's just no consistent structure throughout the season, and that could be really intriguing. It's just, again, a lot of the time you're kind of thinking like, what am I supposed to really focus on here? What are the storylines that are really going on in this game? So again, all you really have is like the Vince and Rachel and Keanu and Rachel, but then suddenly it seems like things are finally moving in a direction where maybe we do have a story with the judges early on in, later on in Rachel's HOH when she decides to put up Rylie. Her and Morgan basically compare notes. Her, Ashley, Morgan, and Will all compare notes, realizing that, like, Mickey is kind of like the distrust between all of them. She's the reason why they can't trust each other. And so they want Mickey to go, but they also want to make sure the votes are there for Rylie, so they decide to pull Vince into this alliance, and I thought this was absolutely going to lead to their games being destroyed, and probably should have. I mean, Vince has so much more control on that other side. I thought for sure he was going to rat this out, but instead he decides not to, and actually does decide to vote with the judges. And so it seems like finally we might have an actual storyline where the judges are maybe going to dominate the rest of this game. Same with this whole Rachel and Keanu dynamic. So again, that's the other thing that's like brought this season down for me, is that there just hasn't been like a consistent storyline to follow. There hasn't been something to really latch onto, so instead you're kind of just latching onto different type of dynamics in the game, where, like, again, that Rachel side of the house, that is the one that is more interesting to me. That is the side of the house that I do find myself really liking, and find them all to be really fun to watch. And there's a lot of interesting gameplay going on there. And a lot of that really is because that's where the intrigue is. That's where the majority of the interest lies. That's where all these storylines come from, and I think that's the best way to sum it up. And that's what's really kind of brought the season down, is that we've been getting all this build up. Maybe now we're finally getting to a payoff of sorts, and if we can get some successful payoff, that's really going to determine how I feel about the season moving forward. Is what is the payoff really going to be? That is something that remains to be seen. And so again, it's kind of a gray area. I can't really say whether or not I'm into this season on that level, just because, again, I don't know how all these things are going to come to an end. Now, that said, the one thing I have not talked about yet, strangely, and I can't believe I haven't brought this up, are the episodes this season, which, by no exaggeration, are mostly abysmal here. Look, I've enjoyed the episodes, like, on their own. If I was to talk about just the episode in isolation, it's fine. But if we're really talking about how accurately does it represent what's going on this season, I mean, this is one of the, I think, worst examples we've gotten. I think this is one of the worst examples we have of that in years. Generally, I think the way that they are portraying events this season is insane to me. I think the best example I can give, especially, is that horrible move that Mickey makes, when she decides to put up Jimmy. For some reason, despite the fact that this was pretty much all something that Mickey was thinking of doing, because Keanu told Morgan that that Keanu called that Jimmy thought that she was a bit overbearing in a conversation, and that's kind of what led to it. Instead, the show decides to give credit to Vince, even though that conversation happened a day after they already were considering it, and he was basically just giving them the okay to do it. But sure, give it to Vince all you want, I guess. I already talked about the Rylie and Katherine stuff and how egregiously inaccurate that is portrayed and how offensively bad that was with how they decided to portray that. But I mean, I could honestly go on and on in terms of the ways they portray things, the way they portray Keanu, and they give him like this hero edit when he really is anything but, and how bad his reads really are. They don't really showcase any of that. They never really showcased what made him such a big threat in the first place, why everyone was like so after him in the first place, why he's been such a big target the whole game. When it comes to the week with, Vince not putting up Rachel, there's so much prep work that went into that they did not show on the episodes. And I think they easily could have done that, and that would have made for a much better product overall. Even going as far back as to Lauren not putting up Ashley, they never really showed on the episodes why she decided to make that decision. So again, it's just kind of appalling to me how you give 90 minutes to the Wednesday episodes, and yet you still cannot find a way to accurately portray what is going on in the show. It's just insane that they decide to do that. And also the fact that you give 90 minutes to the Wednesday episodes, but the Thursday episodes are still like only an hour long, and they always feel rushed because you have a blockbuster, and you can only show so much footage that happened the day before. And then you're never able to sometimes even have like full exit interviews with these people because you got to rush through that as well. And then we spend so much time on who the guest is going to be on Unlocked, which I do not give a fuck about because I'll just end up seeing it on Unlocked anyway. So it just, again, it's baffling. Like, I don't understand why they decided to do that. The fact that you could easily just do a 90-minute episode where we also got to have, like, a live HOH comp afterwards. There's multiple times this season they could have easily done that, and they just decided not to. It's just so frustrating. I don't know why they decided to edit the season like this. I don't know why they decided to structure it like this. It doesn't really make a lot of sense. So much of the Wednesday episode is spent on the comp anyway that it feels like the strategy stuff, while good, we don't get to see enough of it. So again, we've complained about this every season, but I feel like this season it's honestly like at an all-time worst in terms of editing, and there's something that really does have to change. I'm glad that they are starting to experiment more in 90-minute episodes, but I think they need to start doing it maybe for the entirety of the show and not just for the Wednesday episodes, because I think it would behoove them to do so, to tell a much more compelling story and a more accurate portrayal of what's going on overall, even though clearly that's not what they care about. But I'm going to continue to harp on it, so maybe one day they'll actually maybe consider it. Alright, and this last section here that I do want to talk about is something that I'm not going to spend a ton of time on, but it is the new show, Big Brother Unlocked. I know a lot of people have been voicing very, I think, valid concerns that this is a show that is basically made to take away the live feeds, that it gets in the way of us getting to see HOH comms, things like that. And I will agree. I do think that there are, and that it's a show that is just basically being used as like a testing ground to see if the live, if we actually are okay with the live feeds going away and things like that. And I will say right now, I don't think any of that is necessarily true. If it is, I do not put that at all on Taylor and Derek as hosts. And I will say right now, I think all these concerns are very necessarily true, and if it is, I think the blame is being put in the wrong direction, but I'll get into that. As a show, it's fine. Like, I don't have a lot of thoughts on it other than it's fine. It's always great to see Taylor Hale doing something. I think she is just such a likable personality, but she also just has that sort of, But she also just has that charisma and that spunk that, you could kind of just have her doing anything, and I think it would be fun to watch. And I feel like she was just born to host this kind of thing, and anything that gives her more airtime, I am very much a fan of. As far as Derek Levasseur goes, not that much of a fan. I mean, yeah, he played a really great game in Big Brother 16 and things like that, but I just think that his view of the game, the way he looks at Big Brother holistically, is just really boring to me, and I don't really feel like the dynamic between these two is really there. I think, honestly, if Taylor was on her own and there was just a guest you had every so often, especially Jerry O'Connell in episode 2, I think he was easily the best guest they've had of the 4. He just had such a good dynamic with them. He brought so much to the table. He clearly is paying attention to what's going on in the season. I feel like, maybe have those two on. I think the show could be very successful, but I also think what hurts this show is really the fact that it is on network television. And because of that, it's not really the show that we were promised for it to be. Like, Taylor was on RHAP, and she said something to the effect of, like, this show is going to be sort of a way for the casual fans to know what's going on in the live feeds that we don't really get to see. And I would say that's not necessarily the case because of the fact that there's so many segments that we just don't need in this show. There's so much time spent on just ridiculous memes and things like that. The rant room is fun, but we get that in every single sort of recap episode before the season ends, so I don't really know if you necessarily need that. I don't think you need to spend so much time on stuff we've already seen, and I think as a result of that, it just takes up too much of the runtime. Whereas, in my opinion, if you're going to do this right, this has to be a show that is like a Paramount Plus exclusive only, which gives viewers further incentive to get Paramount Plus beyond just the live feeds, but also use as sort of kind of what they used to do when, and I don't like this person, but when Jeff Schroeder was, doing exit interviews and things like that, they used to do this thing on was doing interviews and things like that. They used to do this thing on the live feeds where instead of showing pets, he would come on and kind of give you a highlight reel of things that happened on the feeds. And I feel like that's kind of what Big Brother Unlocked should be. Hey, here's this really cool thing that happened that you might want to know about that the episode didn't get a chance to show you. But the problem is that they're using edited versions of those clips, so we don't really get to see the full impact of what happened. I think the only way you can make that work is if you do it exclusively as a Paramount Plus show, and I think that's where it really could get its full impact. So I think you get rid of Derek, you put in Taylor and another celebrity co-host, and I think then the show could really be something special. I do really like that, where they are using it as a vehicle for the hometown visits and things like that. That is something I very much have missed on the show, and I'm glad to see that they are kind of resurrecting it here, whether you get to episode 1 where we got to see Brendan and, Rachel, we got to see Brendan and the kids and things like that. You get to episode 2 where you get to see, Will's family. We got to see Ava's family. They've done some really good stuff with that. I think that part of the show works really well. I also like getting to see the interworkings of comps. Episode 3, they showed us, how the wall was designed. I thought that was really cool. Episode 4, they kind of used to show us how the new twist of the White Locust was formed. So stuff like that, I think, really does work. And I do think does help give us insight into something we don't normally get to see. But again, it's the stuff like the rant room and the memes. That's just stuff you don't really need, and I do think is actively here in the show. I don't think you need to spend so much time on the draft either. I love getting to see Chelsea. I think it's great that she does have she has some sort of inclusion on the show. And I think she should definitely have some sort of role on the show, but I don't think you need to constantly update us with the draft. I do think, and again, I think these are all things that could be avoided if you just put this as a Paramount Plus exclusive show. Then you don't have to worry about we can only only do this in 40 minutes. Then you can make it as long as you want, and I think the show would be much more effective. So I'm personally not going to say I think the show needs to go. I don't think it's, doing any good. I do think it can be something that actually does have value. I just don't think they've quite recognized it yet because of the fact that it is on CBS. I think if they would put it on Paramount Plus and you do those things I mentioned, then I think it can be a very successful show. But that's really all I want to say about Unlocked. Just want to spend a little bit of time on it. I don't have a ton of thoughts, but overall, it's fine. I think it'd definitely be better, and I don't necessarily want it to go away completely because I do actually think, I do think they have something here. They just haven't quite recognized it yet. So this video is probably going to feel a little bit choppy at this point, but I needed to film this part now just because at this point that I'm recording this, we have not had feeds for about over 24 hours at this point, and that is highly unusual for a Big Brother season, and so we're all kind of wondering, like, what's next? What's really going to happen? We're now in the jury phase. There are 9 players left, and it's not the ideal 9. I would have really liked for Kelley to not be here. I would have really liked for Keanu to not be here. There were multiple opportunities where they should have gone and they didn't, and that is both a fault of the Blockbuster, but it's also a fault of people not voting them out when they need to. Kelley absolutely should have gone when Jimmy did, but people were so insistent on Jimmy going, despite the fact, again, he was a shield for so many different people. Not even just that side, for pretty much, for so many people, he was a shield. Instead, they just take him out, and now Kelley's here, and nobody really wants her here. Same with Keanu, someone they easily could have taken out if it wasn't for that stupid veto that he ended up getting, which I already talked about how I wasn't really a fan of how they did that. I think it's not the ideal 9 that I would want, but normally you would think that this would lead to the game getting a bit more simplified, and instead, we are kind of rushing through things, and I am of two minds about this. One, I don't necessarily have a problem with them rushing the endgame. This last stretch of gameplay usually turns out to be the most boring, especially because normally at this point, things are pretty much locked in. We have a group that's steamrolling. We have an alliance that's taking control of the game. And so you know exactly who is going to go out as a result of that, and it just makes for 3 to 4 weeks of some pretty boring gameplay. This season, that's not really the case because, again, there hasn't really been a consistent alliance. There should be the judges, but again, Vince is so, for some reason, insistent upon that not really being beneficial for him, even though it very much could be because that other side isn't really doing much for him at all because they're so bad at the game. And he's also betrayed them now a multitude of times, so it just doesn't really make sense. But regardless, again, it's a different type of scenario. So I don't have a problem with them rushing through the weeks. If they wanted to do like a double eviction and then a triple eviction, by all means, I really have no issue with that, especially if they were to do it where it was like a classic double eviction. The way they used to do it like back in the day where a double eviction would take place over like a multitude of days, that could actually be really cool. I would be down to see them do that, and I think that there would be a way for them to implement that. And then with the triple, I think you just do it the way you did it on BB Can, where you give one person HOH, they put up 3 nominees, and then you just vote for someone to save, and then the other 2 people just go. I think that's the best way to do a triple because of how disastrous it was in 22. I don't know why you would try to replicate that again, because I feel like they're just going to make the same mistake again. We know the Big Brother is not exactly smart when it comes to learning from their mistakes. I don't know why you would try to do that again. So again, I don't really have a problem with them doing that. What I do have a problem with is them doing a elimination twist where someone allegedly has now gone out of the game because of factors outside of their control, because of a comp that they were not able to complete, and now they're just out of the game as a result of that. And again, there is no way to confirm that this is what's happened. This is just solely based on stuff that Hamster Watch has said, clues that Sharon Tharp has given us. There's really no clear indication of what has actually happened or who has left. And I'm not going to try to speculate who has left, but what I will say is the idea that basically they are doing a comp and the person who does the worst at that comp is just automatically out of the game. after 60 days. They've now made it to the jury phase, and after 60 days, they're just out of the game. They don't have a chance to plead their case. They don't have a chance to get votes to go in their favor. They don't even have a chance to win a blockbuster. They're just out of the game because they couldn't complete a fucking puzzle. To me, that is massively unfair and completely antithetical to what Big Brother is supposed to be as a game. And this is part of the reason why I really don't like that they are stretching out the blockbuster. Big Brother should never just be about compatibility. That is a part of it for sure. Who is winning competitions absolutely does matter towards the end of this game. And we saw that last season when like Mackenzie and Chelsea pretty much were just trading HOHs back and forth, and no one really was able to stop them at that point. That definitely does matter, but there's also that social component, and so much of Big Brother is about developing those relationships that are solid enough to where when you're on the block, you do have a chance to save yourself. And the idea that someone loses a comp and they don't even have a chance to do that, and they're just automatically in jury, just really puts a sour taste in my mouth, and it's really going to put a dampener on what is already, for me, a very mixed season of television so far. I still can't tell you what I really feel about this season. That might be the thing that solidifies it in the other direction, where it goes from a season that I think actually was starting to pick up a bit. I think, like I said, since the Ava week and on, I think the season got really good. Since the Ava HOH and on, I think the season has been on a really upwards trajectory. This could absolutely destroy it, because depending on who left, obviously that could be a big deal. If Rachel's gone, I mean, I honestly might just be out at that point, because I feel like her side's just gonna get pretty much just going to be eradicated at that point, and it's just going to be Kelley, Keanu, Lauren, and Vince in the final four, which, my god, that would be one of the worst final fours we have ever seen in the history of the show, especially because it likely leads to a Keanu and Kelley final two, and I don't even want to think about the possibility of that. But it also would just, again, it would just feel like such a momentum killer. It would just feel like there's so many other ways that they could go about this, because again, if you're gonna do a safety chain, I don't really have a problem with that. I think the way that they could do it again is the way that Big Brother Canada did it, where you have the safety chain, and then it could work perfectly because you have 3 people, and then you just go into a blockbuster, and then from there, it just goes into an eviction. You already have the 3 nominees. That is the way you do it. The last 3 people are just automatically up, and then you just go into an eviction, and I think that could work just fine. But if we find out that someone just left because of a comp, I'm gonna feel, it's just going to feel very upsetting. I'm gonna feel cheated, honestly, really pissed, and I'm gonna feel like that this show is just kind of learning the wrong lessons. And again, I feel like there's just a million different ways they could have gone about this without someone leaving the game just because they couldn't finish a competition. And someone like a Will, someone like a Rachel, someone like an Ashley, unfortunately, are candidates for that to happen to. And I really hope that that is not the case, because I just don't think that that is in any way a fair way for someone to go out in a show that is pretty much based around getting votes to stay and or votes to leave. I think just the fact that someone doesn't even get to do that is just massively unfair all around, and something they really do need to reconsider. But unfortunately, it's already been done, so there's not really much that I can do about it other than just sit here and wait in about a half an hour to see what the fuck happens. And even if it is Keanu or Kelley, who I am not particularly a big fan of, I still will feel bad for them. Nobody should be going out of the game solely based around a poor comp performance. Now, if there's something that leads up to that, then I don't take issue with it. I saw someone on Twitter kind of hint at the fact that maybe someone gets out and then immediately they are now up to be, they are up for eviction, and then they compete in the blockbuster, and then it just kind of plays out from there. And I don't really have an issue with that. But if it's just they do the comp and then they're just automatically in jury, it just feels completely backwards in terms of Big Brother. It does not feel like this is what this show should be. It does not feel like something they should be trying out. If it is something they try out, I hope they realize that it's a terrible idea and never do it again. But the fact they'd even entertain it is just really puzzling to me. They've never done something like this before. I don't know why they try to do it again. Again, there's multiple solutions. They honestly could have also just had a pre-jury double eviction, yes, it would have been 2 hours, but like, you have the blockbuster. You could have easily done something where you just have like 3 people compete in the blockbuster and 2 people go. Like, there are other ways to do this where you don't need to like elongate or shorten a week, and I feel like that is the easiest solution. But again, these are just things they don't think about. They seem to go with the simplest solution on paper that actually makes 0 sense whatsoever. So unfortunately, I really can't put it past them doing something like this, but I really do question why they thought this was a good idea, because nothing about it really does seem like the Big Brother that I know. So even if someone that I don't like leaves, I still will feel like this was a massively unfair way to go out, and just really... And I just will feel like a huge momentum killer pretty much either way. And so overall, I'm just very conflicted. That's really my best thoughts on this season. I'm just very conflicted with how to feel. For everything I like, there's something I don't like. There are house guests that I think have a lot of potential. There are stories that have a lot of potential, but it's all about, are they going to go somewhere? And well, with what we found out recently, I don't know. I really don't know. That might solidify how I feel moving forward, but not going to bring that up in this video because it was meant to be an overview of the game before jury and things like that. We'll get to my thoughts on this week a little bit later on. As of right now, again, I'm just very unsure how to feel about this season. I think this is, it doesn't necessarily feel like other Big Brother seasons have, and I can't quite put my finger on what it is, but I really just hope that things do end up going on an upward trajectory. I think these last 3 to 4 weeks have been really good, have shown a lot of potential. It's just all about, do we end up getting there? And I think that's something that we will know within the next few weeks. But it's honestly really going to come down to who wins, to be honest with you. That's really what I think this season is going to be. It's kind of similar to BB24, except I do think this cast is a little bit more likable than BB24. Like I said, we have there's a whole half of a cast that I like, and the whole half of a cast that I don't really like. BB24, there's maybe like 5 people from that season. There's maybe like 4 people from that season I actually liked. So it's better in that respect, but again, for me, it's really going to come down to who wins the game. If we can look back at the season and say, okay, there is a legitimate path for this person, this is the story of this specific house guest, then I feel like we might actually be onto something. But if this game ends with, like, say, Kelley winning, who should have been out of the game, like, rounds ago, then I think this season is really not going to be looked at very fondly. I think it'll probably be on par with BB25, maybe even a little worse than BB25, in terms of legacies. So yeah, it's a really strange season. It's really hard to it's really hard to articulate how I truly feel about it. And I think, again, a lot of it is just because of just how atrocious so much of the gameplay is, because of just how overly fluid things are, but also, again, just how different of a game this is. And again, normally that would be really intriguing, but I think, again, it's because things just constantly felt like they've been building to something. I really hope this season does end up building to something, because if not, I really do think it's going to be one of the lesser seasons in retrospect. Like I said, I don't have like I said, I just wanted to kind of go ahead and, finally give my thoughts on the season. I know we've been going like 8 weeks in, now 9 weeks, but I just figured it's been long enough. I might as well just finally tell you how I feel. So that's really all I do have to say. But, I will, from this point forward, hopefully be doing weekly videos on Big Brother and how I feel about the rest of the season. We only have like a few weeks left, so I'm excited to see how this does all end up wrapping up, even though I do know what's happened already, and I have very strongly worded thoughts. I have very strong thoughts on it that you'll get to know in my next video. But again, I wanted to focus on the first 8 weeks of the game overall. But that's really it for this. If you do like this video, I do have a ton of other content out there. I will hopefully be doing videos about Survivor 49 and things like that whenever that gets started, as well as a plethora of other movie reviews and TV shows. So if you're into any of that, definitely consider checking my content as well as subscribe to my channel. Would love to have you be part of all of that. But other than that, guys, for this video, hope you guys enjoyed it, and I will see you guys later. Okay, bye. Don't worry about your life.